Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Mike Okwoche. Nigeria's recalculated economy is worth $510 billion, by far the biggest in Africa. Now, officials announced this by using long overdue revised data that gives the West African nation continental bragging rights, but does little for the 70% of its citizens living in poverty. Now, the new value of Nigeria's GDP adds previously uncounted industries like telecommunications, information technology, music, airlines, burgeoning online retail outlets, and Nollywood film production, which didn't exist when the last GDP count was made in 1990. At that time, there were 300,000 landlines, but today, Nigeria has over 100 million cell phone users. What are your thoughts on the recent rebasing of Nigeria's economy? You can share your thought with us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. We'll take a report and Africa Today will be right back. Welcome on board.
Agriculture formerly contributed 30% to the GDP, with the industrial sector contributing 46.1%, while services added 23.6%. The rebased figures now show agriculture's share has dropped to 24%, with that of services growing to 50.2%. Despite the drop in the agriculture sector's GDP contribution, it remains Nigeria's largest employer of labor. The telecommunications industry, wholesale, retail trade, information and communication sectors, alongside real estate, are major drivers of the services sector's growth. The findings from the rebasing exercise show the economy is gradually becoming more service-driven, like Thailand, Malaysia and Egypt.
The structure of the economy has changed significantly, and it's a lot more diversified than we thought earlier.
Our GDP size is large with respect to Africa and even with respect to the world. We are number 26, but remember that when we measure it, divided by the sheer number of people in the country, we are at number 121. So we should also not get carried away.
The number of economic activities reported in the new GDP computation framework is up from 33 in previous series to 46. Entertainment, research, patents and copyrights were some of the new activities included. Nigeria's GDP figures were last rebased 25 years ago. Statistical authorities say the GDP figures will be rebased again in 2015.
Right, welcome back. So it's official. The long overdue and widely anticipated GDP revision in Nigeria has arrived. And it was certainly worth the wait. It is bigger and better than anyone expected. Perhaps the most anticipated question was whether it would rank Nigeria above South Africa. But well, it did. Rebasing has got us talking on Africa Today, and we have Henry Boyle, an international economist, on the show today. You're welcome to Africa Today.
It's my pleasure, Mike.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Right, and also joining us on phone later on from South Africa will be Jacques Botha, Chief Economist of African Foresight. Now, let's start. People often talk about GDP, and when they talk about GDP, it sounds like a very technical economic term, and not everyone really understands. But the concept of GDP is really very common to everyone hears of GDP. But what constitutes a GDP of any country? Could you break it down to very simplistic economic terms for people to understand?
Well, it's not so difficult, really. I mean, GDP simply means the gross domestic product. Gross means total. Okay. Domestic means what you are producing locally. The output is the total value of that. So the gross domestic product would accommodate all those commercial activities which make up our total output in Nigeria. And usually you'd find that this is often divided into three critical areas: manufacturing, agriculture, services, and maybe mineral exploitation as well. But what it simply means is that you calculate, you attempt to calculate the total value of all output, including goods and services, in any one year. Presently, according to the new figure, we have over 500 billion, a rise from the 260 billion that existed previously. This could be seen as an improvement to some extent, but a lot of people, a lot of critical observers would wonder that in reality, maybe it should even have been much better than expected, because generally you find that we have been told severally, or official information has suggested that the growth rate, annual growth rate, has regularly hovered around 5, 6, 7, even 8%. Okay, and if you're talking about that over a period of 25 years, even if you take the minimum growth rate of about 5%, you would expect that in 25 years, you shouldn't be talking of 86% increase in gross domestic output. You should be talking of close to 120% minimum. If, on the other hand, you had predicated your growth rate on 7, 8, 9%, presumably you would be expecting close to 150, even possibly even 200%. The reality, of course, is that we could have done much, much better. The fact that we cannot celebrate this particular index because it doesn't seem to have trickled down as an inclusive, how would I say it, inclusive concept within the economy makes a lot of people worried. But it is not surprising that it hasn't done so, because if anything, it should probably even be more surprising that we have even managed to achieve any element of growth at all.
It's okay. Now, let's come this way. You've given us a background. Now, if a GDP is calculated every year, for instance, now they're talking about a rebasing. What's the difference between calculating a GDP per year and then talking about rebasement of an economy?
I think if you substitute the word, the other word for rebasing, if you substitute the word revalue, okay, I think you would have the same meaning. So what you are doing is to say, for example, if we can use the analogy of a factory. If a factory was built 20 years ago and could only produce toothpicks, and you are asked what is the total output of that particular factory, you would be indicating the value as relative to the output of toothpicks. But if within 24 years, the factory not only produces toothpicks, but produces soft drinks, produces water, produces all sorts of things, including offering even services. And if you have been dealing with this company in the past and you have been looking at its output based on the output of 24 years ago, obviously you would have a misleading figure, because within that period, additional activities, particularly within the services trade sector, has been embarked upon, totally, how would I say it, altering the output figures of that company. So, in other words, you revalue in the same manner that you, for example, rebase the inflationary figures. You must always have a base here. After a certain time, you are supposed to review this. It's a shame that in Nigeria, we waited for 25 years before we carried out this exercise.
Okay, we'll come back to this. Now, joining us on phone is African Foresight Chief Economist, Jacques Botha. Jacques, it's good to have you on Africa Today. Now, I'm going to ask you, what are your thoughts on Nigeria overtaking South Africa as Africa's biggest economy, as specialists or experts will put it?
I'm actually quite impressed. I think we could see it coming. Yeah, it's we've been South Africa's already in 1868. We discovered gold, so that's more than 150 years, or about 150 years ago, and the economy really developed. And we've now matured from then to very much a services economy where 69% of our as Henry so eloquently explained, is from the services industry, while only 2% from agricultural, and 28% from industry. Nigeria is a fairly young economy, where 33% comes from agriculture, more or less, and 43% from industry and 23% from services. So there's so much potential, growth potential for Nigeria, that it's actually, yes, it's the sky is the limit.
Okay, now Nigerian economy has been revalued to be above the one of that of South Africa, but the per capita income in South Africa is still ahead of Nigeria's per capita income when you do the calculations. How do you reconcile this when it comes to the welfare of an average South African against the welfare of an average Nigerian?
I think, yeah, that's we sort of, I've looked at a few numbers, and I think the biggest backlog that maybe on Nigeria has is education. If you just look at the literacy rate of Nigeria versus South Africa, that's a big backlog. And then, as I said, the other one is there's just the time lag. The big money, South Africa it's got an incredibly well developed financial services sector. There's also lots of checks and balances. So money flow easier, tax can be collected much easier. The bureaucrats have been around for a long time. So it's time, and it's basically, I would say, it's that South Africa has had more investment in education than Nigeria has had. I would say that would be the bottom line. I don't know what Henry thinks about that.
All right, now it's okay, but let me ask: how would you rate the per capita income of an average South African? Give us a description.
Yeah, it's for example, where a Nigerian would be maybe $2 US, a South African would be $7 US, so it's almost 3 times more. So an average person in South Africa is about 3 times richer. And it's not because South Africans are working harder. We have a lot of Nigerians here, and we experience them as actually very hard-working people. I think it's the investment in training and education, which is the biggest one, and of course, just investment, capital investment as well, foreign investment outside. South Africa, we were eaten up by the commodity boom, as I said, quite a few years ago. But at this stage, we also have a bit of a problem. We also suffer from the commodity trap, where 65% of our exports are commodity exports. While I think in Nigeria, 95% of your income is from oil exports. So both economies, but we have moved a bit away from that, and managed to develop our economy on a more broader base. I think the positive thing is that now that Nigeria is on the map as the biggest economy in Africa, and you're easily 30% larger now that they've counted all the newly planted mango trees, you guys only, your statistics department for 25 years just counted the mangoes from the old trees. Now suddenly they've counted all the mangoes from the new trees. They suddenly realize there's a much bigger mango crop, and the world also now realizes that. And you will get more interest from many places. People will say, wow, we should rather invest in Nigeria. That's the biggest economy in the world. The other opportunities that you now will have, you will be, South Africa was part of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, China, and India saw South Africa as their little junior partner representing Africa. Now Nigeria is going to try and muscle in there. On the G10, the biggest economies in the world.
All right.
South Africa wasn't really number 10 in the world economy, but we had the recognition of as the biggest economy in the world. So all attention, the IMF, everybody were trying to give us more advice to be the sort of role model for Africa. Now, Nigeria has a chance. Nigeria is going to be pushed by certain people, by certain investors.
Okay. All right, Jacques, let me cut you short here. We'll come back to you just in a few moments from now. Now, critics have argued that the new GDP number is made up from lots of guesses. It is better than the previous guess anyway, but it has a big margin of error attached to it. And the problem with generating a new and better GDP number is that it has to be based on new and better facts. We'll go on a quick break, and Africa Today will be right back. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Now, the last time Nigeria changed the base year was in 1990. First of all, Nigeria is not alone. There were and still are many countries with years, their basis years from the 1980s and the 1990s. Zambia just switched from 1994 to 2010 and increased GDP by about 25%. Now, for Nigeria, some speculate that the GDP rebasing was delayed during the Obasanjo administration because Nigeria was successfully pursuing debt relief. We still have Henry Boyle in the studio, but before we come to here, we still have Jacques Botha joining us still online from South Africa. Now, Jacques, let me ask you this. Now, when the rebasement of any economy, what is it meant to achieve? Is it just a bragging rights or something?
I would say it's no. I think it's actually it serves many purposes, but the big one I would say is for the government to be able to manage its economy, to understand where things are happening, where the growth is happening, where the growth is not happening. I believe, for example, you have what they call a Nollywood, a Nigerian Hollywood industry, which was not even counted at all. Apparently, that's about 1.5% of your GDP. So it's actually to really understand. It's like being able to have a big herd of cattle and able to understand exactly how many cattle you have, so you can manage it properly. Now, all the calves may not have been counted in this herd of cattle. Now, at least you know, this is my cattle. This is how much what I have, how much tax I can actually try, what I can do to get more taxes. There's so many things that you can do if you have an accurate assessment of the economy. And it also, this is a real important thing, is it shows now foreign investors and potential foreign investors, hey, wait a minute, this is actually a much more fertile area for investment. This is bigger. There is much more money being grown in this economy. And I think that's really the big value that has now been done. It's a pity it took so long. It made South Africa be too relaxed. And now it's really going to make South Africa's authorities also much more, because there's always this race of who can be the biggest. China and India had that, and China beat them on that battle for quite a few years now. And so...
Actually, Jacques, before I let you go, let me ask you before I let you go. You said the rebasing could help to check how the economies are growing. But in true terms, how are African leaders supposed to learn from the rebasement of economies?
I think what they will do is there will be more attention, more experts, more bankers will come into the country, talk to them about potential way of making money. Look, the bankers are wherever they smell money, they come, and they'll try and push you guys now to make even more money from the government to the private sector. I would personally think that's the biggest value of the rebasement.
Thank you very much, Jacques, for your contribution on the program today. Thank you. All right, let's come back home. Nigeria is said to have very porous borders. That so many things come in, so many commodities come in and go out unaccounted for. Now, how does this, if we call it smuggling, how does it impact on the economy in the face of when we're talking about the rebasement? The economy is growing by this, it's growing by that, when there is no proper account for every product that is coming into the country and going out?
I honestly don't see what that has to do with rebasing, the issue of smuggling. Okay. I don't see the correlation. But having said so, I think it's important to examine or look at the reality, the expectation that investments would come as a result of the bigger economy. That obviously may be true, but we have to be cautious here, because investors are not charitable organizations. They expect to make profit. They expect to make maximum profit with as little as possible risk. Okay? So even in spite of the fact that we have a much bigger economy, that gives them the confidence that if we borrow, for example, we have enough funds to meet our obligations because we have a big economy behind us. So in other words, when they want to invest as a result of this so-called bigger economy, they will be considering other factors such as security, power, the process of establishing a business in Nigeria. If they had to come and start on a greenfields project, for example, the process of getting land in Nigeria we know can be very tortuous. You could end up in litigations for 5 years or whatever. Nobody also wants to invest in a country where, for example, they have insecurity and their staff would be kidnapped. In other words, sensible as they are, foreign investors are not going to just come for the basis of the fact that your economy is large. But having said so, if they find that as a result of such a big economy, we also have a very willing government, a government that is willing to borrow money it does not need at 13, 14, 15%, only to store that money idly away. It makes more sense for a businessman from abroad to say the chances that I can even get 15% from manufacturing investment in Nigeria is very remote. Meanwhile, the government is offering me 15% just to bring in my money, and they would keep it. And then at the end of the year, they would pay me 15% on my funds for doing absolutely nothing, especially when it is what you call a risk-free sovereign debt. So the chances that you would have the multinationals who have been here, who have weathered the storms for some time, may actually expand, but these people already know what the value of the market or the size of the market is already. So my own worry is that a country, because there has been the general comment that the growth rate or the huge domestic output has not been reflected in the level of employment or in the level of social welfare in the country. The reality, of course, is, that's why I said earlier on that if properly managed, we should even have been enjoying an annual growth rate of about 10% annually. Yeah. In other words, hold on. Okay. In other words, in 24 years, you would be expecting a 250% increase, not a 80-90% increase. So you can't celebrate such a huge leap or relatively huge leap in gross domestic output and expect that that would automatically bring investment to the real sector. It does not encourage you to bring investment to the real sector because of other factors. And in any case, the government has an open door to borrow money. So what stops a foreign investor, for example, approaching the banks where the Central Bank of Nigeria is keeping its funds at 2-3% and borrow at 5% and come back and lend it back to Nigeria? That is the kind of thing that has been happening over the years, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon.
All right. Now, you've mentioned big economy. So let's assume Nigeria is a big economy now, like you said, now from this rebasement. But who are those making the bigger money and making it the big economy when there's still high level of unemployment?
The banks, obviously. The banks.
The banks.
Yes, the government has been subsidizing the banks for a very long time. The government subsidizes the bank when it readily admits that it gives money at 0% interest rate to the banks and then goes back to borrow it back at 12, 13, 14, 15%, especially when it becomes clear that the money being borrowed is not going to be used. It's only going to be warehoused idly because the purpose of borrowing the money is not to apply it for any physical infrastructural development, but to take away money from the system because it is perceived that there is surplus money in the system and there is the fear of inflation. Consequently, in order to restrain the inflationary spiral, it is necessary for them to go borrow money they don't need, in spite of the fact that they haven't asked, or maybe they know and they refuse to acknowledge it, that what caused the huge surplus cash in the first place? And how can surplus cash exist in such quantity and not be available for the development of education, as Jack was referring to earlier on, or even for the development of health institutions, so that our people don't go to India and South Africa for health tourism and this type of thing? The reason, of course, is very simple. We have a government that is subsidizing the banks. You ask who are the main beneficiaries of the banks. For example, we have, in the past few years or so, with the creation of AMCON, created additionally 5 trillion naira in naira cash, and put it in the hands of the banks, and created the problem of excess liquidity. Added, I wouldn't say create, added to the problem of excess liquidity, which makes it necessary for the government itself to consciously bid to borrow money it does not need, and borrow at a high rate. And when it borrows at a high rate, you can expect no bank is silly enough to say, I would prefer to give my money to XYZ Enterprises, who has all the challenges of failure staring at them, whereas a government is prepared to take my money and give me 12, 13, 14, 15%. All right. Growth now, and multiple growth and inclusive growth are never built on those kind of foundations.
From this standpoint now, if the government is deciding now that Nigerians should now benefit from the bigness of its economy, if I have to use that term, what steps should be taken for Nigerians to be the true beneficiaries of this so-called rebasement?
There are a few things that are obvious contradictions. Okay, as I've said, it doesn't make sense for a government to be borrowing money it does not need at 12, 13, 14%. I mean, that should immediately go away. It doesn't also make sense for a government to say, we continuously have a deficit annually in our budgets at the same time that simultaneously we have a surplus account. The two, there's a contradiction. It doesn't also make sense, or it doesn't, how would I say, encourage local domestic production when interest rates are in the region of 23, 24, 25%. And it doesn't make sense if your own government is deliberately instigating high interest rates, while at the same time recognizing that high interest rates is no good for any economy. It is no good for employment opportunities. It's no good for trade. It is not good for inflation. It is not good for exchange rate stability, and so on and so forth. So really, I would say we should not celebrate the issue. It's a good thing, a good bragging rights,
but we shouldn't be carried away.
But you shouldn't be carried away.
All right, thank you very much for coming on the program today.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah. We thank Jack Both for joining us from South Africa earlier on. Now, Nigeria's Finance Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala told the news conference that the new data makes Nigeria the 26th largest economy in the world and raises its per capita income to $2,688,000. Rather, making it 121 in the world, up from 135th. But, well, that is still feeble compared to South Africa's $7,336 for its population of 48 million. And Nigeria has been Africa's biggest drawer of direct foreign investment, despite numerous woes ranging from massive corruption and oil thefts, costing the country some $20 million a day, to an Islamist insurgency in the northeast, and then to a paralytic electricity supply that keeps businesses dependent on diesel-run generators. Now, despite all these, Africa seems ready to take her destiny in her own hands. And we should not forget that the continent is not growing, but changing. That's our show for today. Don't forget to watch previous episodes on the show on youtube.com/TVC Africa Today. And until we come your way again, I am Mike Okwoche. And don't forget, this is Africa. Bye for now.